I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for our 50th anniversary celebration and client appreciation event. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge members of our small but mighty team. Donica Theater, Lily Watson, and Kathy Burnett do an outstanding job enabling us to run our business on a daily basis, doing everything from answering the phones to making sure trades settle properly. Mike Petrie recently joined us on the investment side of our business, where he helps Mark Foster pick stocks that only go up. You'll be hearing more from Mark shortly, but we've been business partners for over 30 years, and I can tell you a fella couldn't ask for a better partner. We also have several Kirr Marbach alumni in attendance tonight, and we'd like to thank them for their important contributions that allowed us to reach this important milestone. Last, but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce the independent directors of our mutual fund, the Kirr Marbach Partners Value Fund. The directors provide valuable guidance to us and important oversight and protection for our hundreds of shareholders. We thank them for their dedication and wisdom. Tom Thornburg is our newest director, having joined the board in 2022. John Elwood became a director in 2018. We launched the Kirr Marbach Partners Value Fund on December 31st, 1998, and Jeff Brown has been a director this entire time. So fortunately, our board has no term limits, so Value Fund has become Jeff's personal Hotel California. We are so grateful for the trust and confidence our clients put in us on a daily basis. We are humbled they have allowed us to be their trusted advisor. Without our clients, we wouldn't have a business. We are truly blessed to have clients who have been with us since the very beginning. And at this time, I'd like to recognize the Rogers family, Talmadge, Jean, and Sean, who have been with us from July 1st, 1975. So next, I'd like to introduce our founding generation of partners. David Kirr and Terry Marbach worked together at the Irwin Management Company for 10 years, managing investments for the J. Irwin Miller family. They started Kirr Marbach and Company on May 1, 1975, along with Lois McGathy, office manager and partner in Kirr Marbach. Yeah, look at those guys. Theirs was a modest beginning. With $0 in assets under management at 101 Washington Street, you can see the number there, the former location of a junkyard. The Miller family owned the building, and Mr. Miller rented part to Dave and Terry for $100 a month, including surplus desks, chairs, and typewriters. The other tenant sold CB radios out of his space and had a German Shepherd for security. Dave, Terry, and Lois had to exit their part of the building to access the restroom, all while trying to avoid the dog. So, modest beginnings indeed. Greg Somerville joined Kirr Marbach from Reams Asset Management in 1981 to work with Terry on the investment side of the business, enabling David to focus on client service. Greg would go on to have tremendous success leading the investment side of our business for many years. I'd like to recognize David, his wife Barbara, Terry, his wife Connie, Greg. Judy was not able to be here tonight, but I would like them to stand and be recognized. Pretty handsome bunch. So Kirr Marbach opened for business on May 1, 1975, which was a momentous time in history. For the investment industry, May 1, 1975 is known as May Day, when fixed commissions for stock trades went away, paving the way for discount brokers like Charles Schwab and E-Trade we're all familiar with, and who will apparently execute trades for free, or so they say. May 1, 1975 is also important because of what happened the day before. The headline in the May 1, 1975 edition of the New York Times, if you can see up there, it was 20 cents at the time. It's $4 today. announced Saigon had fallen to the communists the day before. The communists would rename Saigon Ho Chi Minh City, and the image of defeat of the U.S. Embassy being evacuated from the rooftop by a helicopter said 1,000 words. It was one of the darkest days in the history of the United States, and surely the worst time possible to start a business, let alone a business based on investing in the future of America. But we're sure glad Dave and Terry did, and we thank them for taking the leap. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed at 821.34 on April 30, 1975. It closed just over 42,000 on March 31st, 2025. That's a price-only return of 51 times, and if you had reinvested dividends, your return would have been 101 times. Compound average total return of 9.67%, just a little shy of 10%. So Albert Einstein, you'll remember him, famously called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world, highlighting its ability to create significant wealth accumulation over time. He said of compound interest, "She who understands it earns it. She who doesn't pays it." According to the related rule of 72, you take 72 and divide it by your return to calculate the number of years it takes to double your investment. So at 9.67%, you double your investment every 7.5 years. So $100,000 invested on day one would grow to $200,000 after 7.5 years. That $200,000 will grow to $400,000 after year 15, and to $800,000 after 22.5 years. So indeed, the $100,000 invested April 30, 1975 would have grown to $10,036,436 on March 31st, 2025, if you would have left it alone. So this isn't to say it was a smooth 10% ride, it was anything but. This was one of my favorite illustrations, plotting the Dow Jones Industrial Average from the previous slide and adding all of the calamities investors have faced since 1896. It's hard to fit 130 years of activity into a single illustration, but here's the important takeaways. There's always reasons not to invest, and the key to making money in stocks, is not to get scared out of stocks. Leave it alone is easy to stay, but can be the hardest thing in the world to do when the world seems like it's coming to an end. Just since 2000, we've had the terrorist attacks of 9/11/01, the global financial crisis of 2007-2008, and COVID just 5 years ago in 2020. The world seemed like it was coming to an end each of those times, but didn't. Even with those catastrophes and many, many more, stocks recovered every time and compounded at 10% over the past 50 years. You may be familiar with the curse, "May you live in interesting times." Well, we're certainly living in an interesting time. Fast forwarding to the present, we can be pretty sure the next update of this illustration will list tariffs, trade war, as a calamity of 2025, and we're not even halfway through the year. But our message is, nobody knows what the future will bring, but has been the case for the past 50 years, we believe, slow and steady wins the race. So I can't wait to hear what Mark and Mitch have to say about tariffs, trade wars, budget deficits, higher education, and more. But before I ask Zach Greiner and Maggie Kamman to introduce the Fireside Chat participants, I want to thank you again for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the food and beverage provided by the Harrison Lake Country Club, the beautiful flowers from my friend Gina Martin at Pomp and Bloom, and the chocolates at your table from the Candy Dish in Nashville, which is owned by Maggie, her husband Kyle, and Kyle's parents. With that brief stroll down memory lane, I'd like to invite Zach and Maggie to the podium to introduce Mark and Mitch.
Thanks, Mickey. So for those that don't know me, I'm Zach Greiner, and I'm here to introduce Kirr Marbach's Chief Investment Officer, Mark Foster. Mark will be the host for the conversation with our distinguished guest, former Indiana Governor and Purdue University President, Mitch Daniels. But before he comes out, I want to take a minute to introduce him, especially for those who may not know him yet. You know, as I was reviewing Mark's bio in preparation for his introduction, I couldn't help but notice how much his professional timeline and my own personal one overlap. Mark became a CFA charter holder in 1985, a very special year for me as well, the year I was born. 2 years later, while I was mastering the art of walking and potty training, Mark joined Kirr Marbach alongside our senior partner, Mickey Kim. Fast forward to the early 2000s, Mark took over as portfolio manager for the Kirr Marbach all-cap strategy, stepping into leadership during a pretty tough stretch following the dot-com crash. I can relate, too, to that pressure. I was worrying about who I was going to be asking out to prom. Since then, Mark's led the Kirr Marbach strategy with great success, and his track record reflects that. His achievements, he's achieved a number of milestones over the years, and I've hit a few along the way. In 2011, Mark was named Manager of the Year in the all-cap value category by Emerging Manager Monthly, the same year I got my first adulting job. In 2013, Mark was recognized as Barron Top 100 Portfolio Manager. I got married. In 2014, Kirr Marbach received the Lipper Award for Top Mutual Fund, all-cap core category, the same year I bought my house. You see these parallels, don't you? The most recently, in 2024, Kirr Marbach's mutual fund, managed by Mark, was recognized by both Morningstar and Barron's as a top performer. I was a top performer in the Columbus Mini Marathon. I didn't win. I could keep going, but I'm starting to run out of my own personal accomplishments to keep up with Mark. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming my podcast partner and Kirr Marbach's Chief Investment Officer, Mark Foster.
I found your immigrant heritage.
Well,
Good evening, everybody. As the lone Boilermaker currently on Kirr Marbach's staff, it is a true honor to introduce our distinguished guest for our fireside chat tonight. We're joined by a leader who has left an extraordinary mark on Indiana across government, education, business, and civic life. Mitchell E. Daniels Jr. served as Indiana's 49th governor from 2005 to 2013. Under his leadership, the state became a national example of fiscal discipline, infrastructure investment, and good government, earning top credit ratings and a reputation for balanced budgets and bold reform. After 2 successful terms as governor, Governor Daniels took over the reins as president of Purdue University, where he served from 2013 to 2022. His tenure was transformative. Purdue froze tuition for nearly a decade, expanded access to higher education, and rose to national prominence for its focus on innovation, affordability, and student success. His commitment to leadership didn't stop there. Through the Mitch Daniels Leadership Foundation, he continues to support and mentor emerging leaders across Indiana, helping to build a new generation of civic-minded changemakers. From his early roles in business in the federal government, including as director of the Office of Management and Budget under President George W. Bush, to his enduring impact here in Indiana, which continues today through his work with the Liberty Fund, Governor Daniels has brought intellect, humility, and a deep sense of purpose to every role he has held. Governor Daniels brings a rare blend of executive experience, intellectual curiosity, and practical wisdom, making him the perfect voice for conversations with Mark about leadership, policy, innovation, and the future of education and public life. He is, without question, one of Indiana's most respected and influential public figures, and we are deeply fortunate to have him with us here tonight. So please join me in welcoming Governor Mitch Daniels.
that's too kind, Maggie. Thanks.
Well, I just want to echo Mickey's comments earlier, welcoming all of you. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to spend some time with us this evening, and also appreciate Mitch Daniels swinging by for a little bit of Q&A and
And a milkshake at Sahara-Coast.
and a milkshake at Sahara-Coast. So, you know, as Maggie was going through this list of accomplishments, I thought there was really a significant omission in that list, and the accomplishment that wasn't listed actually took place probably about 200 yards from this very location. For those of you that are longtime Columbus residents, you will remember that at one point, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles License Branch was located just down the way in the old Commons. You will also remember that if you were here, anytime you went there, it was a 2 to 3 hour wait. People took books down there because it just took so long to make that transaction. So from my standpoint and for many in this room, we appreciate all the work that you did with that, not only in turning around those transaction times, but I think just demonstrating that there are improvements that can be made to government agencies, to divisions that have historically not been very consumer-oriented. And I think that's made a big difference. I read something the other day that said on your tombstone, you were going to say, you've raised 4 daughters and you turned around the BMV.
That's right.
Which of those was most difficult?
Oh, I didn't say I was going to do that. I said if there ever is a tombstone, that's what they'll put there. That's not a bad way to be remembered. You ask that question. I've had that question a lot of times, but you ask it in an especially perceptive way because it was about fixing an obnoxiously bad, notoriously bad part of state government. But there was a reason that we made such an emphasis on it first. When we came to office and everything needed fixing, and I said we're going to find good people and we're going to go to work on every corner of this because the people who pay for it deserve to be served well. But I said the 2 things we're going to concentrate on right out of the starting blocks are the Department of Revenue and the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. Why? Because they touch everybody, and everybody deals with them. I said if we could ever fix those 2, maybe people would listen a little more closely to the next idea or reform suggestion. So we did. Somebody said a little earlier, talking about, well, it's great to run government like a business. I always say, no, government's not a business. It can be more business-like, though. And the Bureau of Motor Vehicles is as good an example as you can think of. I remember when some bright folks, our team had been out of office for 16 years. It was really a blessing because we got people from business and from other walks of life who came in with what the Chinese call young eyes. Why do we do that? And did you ever think of doing this instead? And the team that went to look at the BMV came back and said, what you have here is 170 Dairy Queens. I mean, it's a retail business. It's a walk-in, retail, cash-oriented business. And we're doing a terrible job of it, but it's not it shouldn't be that hard. And so there's a business school case studies have been done about this, and I won't take your time to go through all the interesting things that happened. We made some slip-ups, but within 3 years we were winning international, not national, but international awards for that. I had on the sort of dashboard that I had on my desk computer, the one I looked at the most closely was BMV. We were measured, I learned doing business with Walmart, something that really applies in the absence of competition in the nonprofit sector or the government sector particularly. Walmart, the guy I used to deal with there said, if you're not keeping score, you're just practicing. And we tell you, we measured everything. BMV, we measured door-to-door visit times. Mm-hmm. They were down in below 10 minutes when I left. There's still something close to that. We measured customer satisfaction, had 2 or 3 ways to check on that, and we measured cash discrepancies with 0 being the goal. So, it was, and I do think it had the effect we hoped, because people did notice the difference, and I think they thought, well, maybe this gang can shoot straight.
Certainly appears that way.
I used to say people used to go in a BMV with a boxed lunch and a copy of War and Peace and hope they didn't finish them both before somebody knew they were there.
That's the way it was here. Yeah. I took a book with me. So the format for our discussion this evening is going to be a fireside chat, and we'll focus on different subjects. We'll spend a little bit of time on leadership, education, cost cutting. Well, we want to start with something that's certainly affecting our business. Many of you that run businesses are affected by that as well, and that's this idea of tariffs. And, the stated goals of these tariffs, at least as I understand it, national security, securing better supply chains, a level playing field for trade, reindustrialize the U.S., better U.S. jobs, all those things, all these goals are very admirable. But what advice would you give this administration regarding this strategy?
Well, a little late to give the advice I'd like to have given them. But in trying to, I don't pretend to know what they're up to, but I think the question is it tactical or strategic? Meaning, if it's tactical, and the idea is to, the old line about the guy who hits the mule with a 2x4, and somebody says, why? So, well, first you got to get their attention. And so if this is a way of getting the attention of trading partners, and many of them have taken undue advantage of the export-import balance and the rules of that road versus us, then I can understand it. All I can say, if that's the game, then it better work fast, because it's already having, and I don't have to tell people in this room, it's already having a very deleterious effect on businesses, especially smaller businesses. And I've heard from several who literally are being pushed to the brink of, Chapter 11 or something in no time at all. And so they can't take months. If the game is to get the attention of trading partners, bring about the new bilateral or multilateral arrangements, okay, but it better work, and it better work, in my opinion, pretty fast, or the consequences will be a good while in unwinding. Now, if it's strategic, if this is really what they think our economy, the world economy ought to look like, then it's the dumbest thing I ever saw. And so I'm hoping that it's really option A.
I think we've heard from just kind of talking to various people in the room beforehand. I mean, everybody's struggling trying to figure out what you do, and it changes with some frequency, so you're kind of spending a lot of time trying to adjust.
Yeah, even if things start to work, and let's hope they do. I mean, they say they're talking to other countries, even including China. But here's the other reason I worry that somebody, a president, I guess, thinks this is good economics, is that if the game here, if the idea here was to, get a fairer world regime vis-a-vis the Chinese who've been taking advantage of everybody, then I wouldn't have started by beating the tar out of all our allies who you hope will then join you now, suddenly ignore the slights and join you in this new and more fair arrangement. But we'll see. It could just be that the folks doing it are just so much more clever than the rest of us.
If you had to guess how it plays out over the next month or two?
My guess is that they'll start retreating and claim it was a win. We were being reminded of the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, and back at the time, Senator Aiken from Vermont is remembered for saying, his strategy was declare victory and come home. You could see a version of that, but the problem is, even if they are able to make, and I hope they will, some new deals, and they'll announce them to great fanfare, but there will be damage. I mean, we've just seen in the data that just came out extraordinarily a large amount that almost overnight, people building inventory and importing goods to make sure they could get them ahead of the new rates, and that'll unwind whatever happens.
That was the largest quarter of inventory gains in the U.S. since 1947.
Yeah. I mean, the economy, if that hadn't happened, the economy would have been reported to be growing at 3 or 4%.
Right.
All was wiped out by this huge amount of imports, and people aren't going to. First of all, they're not going to import them at the new tariff levels, and they won't need to because they filled their warehouse.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to our next subject, which is the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. So certainly people are aware of Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, but before Elon, there was Mitch Daniels. So as the director of OMB, the Office of Management and Budget under George Bush, Mitch earned the moniker the Blade for his relentless rooting out of waste, fraud, and abuse. And that approach followed you to your governor's office and to Purdue as well. What are your thoughts on the present day DOGE?
I was glad to see the initiative, if only to focus the public's attention on the genuine abuses and the it's not simply a matter of waste. The federal government does all sorts of things that it does so badly that they should just stop, or that are duplicative, obsolete, redundant, all that sort of thing. I didn't ever feel that I earned the nickname the president gave me back then.
So you didn't like that name?
I like the name, but
Okay.
I had the worst thing, not the worst thing, a bad consequence of 9/11 was I was getting, because that was all over the national press, and people who liked the idea of economy and government were sending me blades. I had a great collection going. I had pen knives, I had beautiful some guy made one that says the Blade, out of wood. I got a couple samurai swords. And then
Nice.
Then the 9/11 attacks happened, and you couldn't mail blades to the White House anymore, so cut off my collection. But I was glad to see the initiative, but I wish they had stayed away from lofty and completely preposterous predictions. $2.6 trillion.
Yes.
Whoever thought that anything within 2 or 3 orders of magnitude of that was possible from an initiative like that. And so I think they'd have been better off simply to concentrate on finding some flagrant examples which illuminate the larger issue. Ultimately, Congress has to step up to that. There's only so much you can do. I write these columns for the Washington Post, and I wrote one a couple months ago supporting a very unpopular idea with most people, which is impoundment. The presidents used to have the power to withhold spending.
Right.
And that was a casualty of the Watergate reforms in 73 or 4. And, but I'll not make the argument here, but there's a tool. If the president had that tool, DOGE could bring him larger opportunities than they're going to be able to act on. They can cancel some grants and things like that, and they should. But that is such a tiny part of the problem that if he had the impoundment power, however, or something like it, they could do more. The big issue here, and maybe we can return to it later, the real issue here is, like his predecessors, the president has put off the table what ultimately has to be dealt with. All the money, more or less, all the big money is in the safety net programs. And that's the biggest issue facing this country domestically. And nothing about DOGE gets at that. When we came to office in Indiana, we certainly gave the assignment to all our newly recruited agency heads and others. We went after this in a big way and had because the state was literally bankrupt at the time. We passed the tightest budget in over a half century. But we did have a little SWAT team. I said, in addition to everything else we're doing, with this group of young rowdies, I said, you got a roving portfolio. And they found some really great little things. The one that everybody remembers is, we noticed that the state had an extraordinary number of vehicles, something like 1 vehicle for every 3 or 4 state employees. It seemed excessive. And so these guys went over to the state garage and put a penny on the left rear tire of all the vehicles. And then he went back in a month, and if the penny was still there, it was give us the keys.
Nobody's using them.
Right. And You know, it was sort of a stunt, but stunts have their value, like DOGE. And I remember, it wasn't but about 4 or 5 months in, I went over here to the West Side auction in Indianapolis, and I auctioned off the 1,000th state vehicle that we'd gotten rid of, and that was just the beginning. So things like that can have a value in public information. They can do some surgical things. They can find things that the people who should be scrutinizing this all the time, the elected officials of Congress, could act on if only they would.
So, I mean, if we look back historically, particularly on a federal level, there have been a number of commissions, Grace Commission, Simpson-Bowles, that have tried to tackle this, but really have made little progress. Why do you think that is? What are the impediments to making progress?
Well, the big one is it's a hazard in all democracies, in all democratic systems, and that is that especially as they become more and more successful, more and more prosperous, government invents to promote its own popularity, invents all kinds of ways to spend public money. And the beneficiary, the benefits are concentrated, but the costs are diffuse. So every time, there's all sorts of completely nonsensical, outmoded, or simply things we can't afford or shouldn't afford. But there's a special interest that benefits from that. That's all they care about. And they're active and vociferous, and they're heard from. And meanwhile, the costs are spread over this entire audience and all the rest of us, and it's not on. And most people don't notice or don't think it's in their interest to spend their time opposing even the most useless, flagrant, or as I say, obsolete of these spending programs. You know, the Simpson-Bowles Commission, I thought was a very unfortunate situation, because there you had that was a very serious effort. Grace Commission was useful, but I mean, they went around exposed, again, like DOGE, specific items. Many of those did get ironed out, went away for a while. But Simpson-Bowles was looking at the big picture, and their proposal wasn't perfect. But we'd be much, much better off if it had been accepted. And I thought it had a real chance to be, but President Obama killed it, and nothing like it has been attempted since.
Yeah, it was just sort of, hey, thanks for doing that. Got set on a shelf.
Yeah, the idea keeps coming up, Mark, of doing this, and I wish somebody would, but the lesson of Simpson-Bowles is if it's done again, it has to have teeth, meaning that Congress, in creating it, Congress has got to agree to an up or down vote on the whole package. And that was not the case before, and especially when the president said he wouldn't support it, it never got to a vote.
Yeah. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about education. You know a little bit about that, given your time at Purdue. So as we talked earlier, you're known for running Purdue a little bit more like a business. Was that controversial at the time? What sort of pushback did you get? I seem to remember reading lots of articles about faculty were not happy with you.
Well, faculty are never too happy. I mean, they were fine as a group. As a group, I'll just share with the group, this is not Purdue specific, I think this is pretty much a general rule. You should never confuse audibility with credibility. The people who are heard and heard the loudest and the most often, very often reflect a small percentage. It's a little analogous to the thing I just talked about, special interest in spending. For instance, at Purdue, I could name a lot of issues on which, if you just read about it, you think the faculty's up in arms, but it's really a small percentage. Most of the rest of them are too busy on the real work of their research and teaching. No, I mean, the interesting reaction, the reaction was not, people were surprised and some worried, yes, that we would short the faculty, short the staff, not be committed to continuing the invest in the school, and they quickly found out that we were very committed to all those things. So that wasn't too bad. The interesting, however, most interesting reaction came from the admissions people. Because when I said, I'd been there not too long, I was trying to read their purposely opaque books, They're designed to confuse people. They confused me for a while. But anyway, I finally realized it looked to me like we were in strong enough shape, and 36 straight years of increases. And I knew from being your employee for the previous 8, or really 10 years, all over this state, that was really beginning to pinch, particularly middle-income families. So I said, look, I think we could take a 1-year time out. I never imagined, Purdue will soon be on year 14 without a change. I wasn't envisioning that, but I said, just to send a signal of sensitivity. And, we were put here, a land-grant school, Purdue, we were put here to open the doors of higher education. Back at a time, 160 years ago, when only a couple % of Americans went to college. And so I said, we should, how about, a 1-year pause? So the very talented woman who ran admissions at the time said, oh, Mitch, man, you do that, people will think we don't have confidence in our products. Meaning, while everybody else is going up again, if we don't, people, And I said, Pam, now I just landed here on Mars, this alien planet. I said, but back on Earth, that's not what they're saying. They're troubled about the cost of this and the value that they want to make sure they're getting value for their product. So anyway, we did it. It worked out better than I would have ever imagined. That's a whole other story. But first of all, it was not that hard to do. People think it was some sort of wizardry. I wish I could claim that, but really wasn't very hard. Just basic principle. Anybody, business people in the room would have done the same things we did, sure. And then, quite contrary to Pam's concern, along, I think, with other positive things that were going on at Purdue, applications began to grow and grow and grow. And they are, getting close to 3x what they were when we started all this. And every business person in the room knows what a strong top line. You don't have to raise your prices if volume's going up. And we are now 30% larger than we were when that first year happened. So that's the story.
Yeah. And so my observation would be not a lot of other schools have done that.
Yeah, I was wrong about, I thought so, yeah. No, there's nobody who's done what we have done. And, this is what every marketer hopes for. You want to differentiate your product, and we are completely differentiated and all over the country. I mean, the surge in applications is not from Indiana. We haven't got any more kids basically than we did then. So that's up some, but the surge is from other states, and we know that this, along with the quality, right behind the quality of a Purdue education, which is highly regarded, right behind that, and part and parcel, is the assurance that you won't pay too much and you won't get socked with a huge surprise each spring in terms of an increase. I actually thought I was wrong. I thought at the time if schools like ours didn't start to address it, I said somebody's going to make us do it. This is true, I think, in many other contexts in higher ed. If you don't reform yourselves, somebody may make you do it, and make you do it in ways that are less than wise. But the sector continued to raise prices above inflation. It moderated some during the decade I was there, but not nearly as fast as I thought it might. But now, the reckoning has really arrived.
Yeah. Well, so you referenced colleges, universities reforming themselves. You did an interview with CNBC a week or so ago, which I thought was really good. And some of the points that you made there, I think would be good to share with our audience today about, about that reform, about the changes that are taking place, maybe sports and NIL. You've got this whole issue of should universities lose their tax-exempt status? I think all those were subjects that you sort of touched on in that CNBC interview. Maybe you can highlight some of those for us this evening.
Sure. No, I mean, it troubled me that, as I say, in a variety of contexts, not just cost, although that was a flagrant example, which the sector, people say, why did they raise prices like they did? And the answer is because they could. Right. Really until very, very recently. But that was hardly the only concern people had about higher ed as a sector. The issue of ideological conformity or enforced conformity of thought, it's very real. Happily, less so at our university than many, but there's no question, there's no denying that through several generations of self-selection, we have faculties that are far too homogenous in their thinking, and there are places where that has translated into telling young people what to think, not teaching them how to think. Right. That's a real issue. The trespasses of free speech were real. We saw them on far too many campuses. And I'm talking, this is well before, this is people being shouted down and bullied away out of coming to campus in the first place. The worst thing about that, yes, First Amendment and all that, I'm not minimizing it, that argument or that part of the problem. But in higher ed, to restrict speech or to declare a consensus over some subject, particularly a scientific subject, the worst examples of all, strikes at the very heart of the academic enterprise. Why are these universities there? Two reasons: to discover new knowledge and to transmit it to next generations. Knowledge is only discovered, knowledge only advances when ideas collide and when hypotheses are tested and experiments are run. Albert Einstein wrote to Niels Bohr and other of the great experimental physicists of his day and said, please do some experiments and prove my general theory of relativity is wrong. Now, that's the way science is supposed to operate. And of course, we saw over many subjects, climate being the obvious example, COVID, disgraceful to try to silence, ostracize, rule out of polite discourse people who challenged the scientific basis of this or that. Turns out the skeptics or the dissidents were right. Right. But even if they hadn't been, it would have been a huge violation of really the academic mission to declare that only one side is right and only one side can be heard. So then schools getting into subjects that they sometimes didn't know much about. This is the issue of whether schools should be spouting off on issues unrelated to their own business. Now, I notice a lot of presidents have rediscovered the virtues of something we stuck by at Purdue the entire time, institutional neutrality. We're here to be a forum for differing views, not expressing views ourselves. But on all these fronts, higher ed there are exceptions, of course, but not very many. Higher ed took a position that, the great unwashed out there just don't understand how noble and how right we are. And finally, I think now some of the proposed remedies go too far, that's what you get. That's what you get when you arrogantly straight arm suggestions that you think twice about the way you're doing business.
Federal government pulling money from universities, things like that.
Well, some of the money probably should be pulled, but to threaten to take away, there's a baby in bathwater problem here, and threatening to take away all the money because you don't like what the admissions office is doing, right? Or the student affairs people who are supposed to be protecting free speech. Okay, there are ways that you could penalize there without terminating medical research that we all really need to have continue.
Right. I have a number of other education-related questions, but in the interest of time, I want to touch on a couple of other things as well. Leadership. So you've led in government, you've led in academia, you've led in the private sector. What leadership principles have been constant across all of those roles?
Oh, just to be selective about it, I think three that it's hard for me to imagine a position of responsibility that doesn't involve two or three things. One is setting a personal example, not asking more of others, and certainly in terms of integrity and ethics, then you're willing to uphold yourself. That's sort of a price of entry as far as I'm concerned. Secondly, at least to me, I always used to think in terms of painting a picture, by which I mean, I think two things. One, identifying what is special about our business, our institution, whatever it is, our state or our state government, why everybody should feel really fired up to come to work. What's great about what we do here? Whose lives do we make better? I don't care what you're doing, there's always, if people are paying money for it in a system of voluntary exchange, then you're doing something really valuable. And everybody in the place ought to be reminded of that all the time, and whoever's got the temporary leadership job should believe that and live it. And then, of course, in the second part of that, when I say paint a picture of where we're going, how tomorrow can be bigger, better than now. And if you're first of all, if you can't think of those things, you better ask whether you're the right person. I get young people always want to know about, God bless them, they want to jump, they want to lead as fast as they can. I'm all for them, but I always say, well, can you answer the why question? I always say, what's the why? And I shouldn't be in the answer. I'm not disparaging the idea of, I have a passion, for this, or I've always wanted to serve. Okay, bully for you, but the why should be third person. What are you going to do if you're given this assignment? What are you going to do that makes the place better, makes the business stronger, where are we going? And then be able to explain that well to others. Just yesterday I was up at Purdue, and we have a program this was at the business school, and as we reshaped that recently, I insisted that it have the first 2 years have a core in an undergraduate core in which people will read great books and have to do more writing and things like this. And the main reason was because I had had so many businesses. Purdue's the most recruited campus in the country. And I'd heard over and over and over from businesses, they'd say, God, we love your graduates. They actually learned what the diploma says. They learned. And they have a great work ethic. They show up, where do I add value, not what are you going to do to fulfill me? And they said, there is one thing. We wish they could communicate a little better. We wish they could, share with a team what they know, or write a memo that everybody else could learn from. Well, anyway, I think that's a really key part of any leadership assignment. And then the final thing is, you're the person who has to make the trade-offs. That's what it's about. Most colossal, collective, or broad scale, I would say, failure of leadership we have seen in our time was COVID. And what it boiled down to was in place after place, public officials, health officials, educational leaders, businesses in many cases, people defaulted on the duty to balance priorities and make trade-offs. And so that's an inescapable part of it. By the way, it means that when you make those, axiomatically, people will be upset, those who you decided against. You didn't fund their program. You didn't authorize the headcount in their department. You quit spending money on their pet project, whatever it is. And so you have to learn, and it took me a while to learn that, it's not that you can't keep everybody happy, it's that you will make people unhappy, and you just have to be prepared to live with that. When I got to Purdue, people kept saying, well, you had all these other jobs. What's the most valuable, thing you picked up along the way? I said, scar tissue.
Fair enough. So of these various jobs that you've had, have you found one to be more fulfilling than the other? Or is this like which of your daughters is the favorite? Or
Yeah, it's very like that. I'm so grateful for the chance to do them all, and it would depend on the day. I think our 8 years as governor would be hard to top because we came with a very clear, as I said, why. Our state was doing nothing, going nowhere, and being left behind by states that were moving in a fast-moving economy and society. And I think to an extent we jolted the state into a different gear. We certainly addressed a lot of its problems and left things, I think, in stronger shape. And that's what you hope to do. But I feel equally good about the years at Purdue and wouldn't trade either experience.
Yeah. So your time as governor, as you referenced, were known for balanced budgets, fiscal discipline. I remember reading an article one time where you suggested to employees that they reuse their paper clips. And I read that and I'm like, well, of course, doesn't everybody do that? We're value investors, so we do that all the time. But the states are sort of this laboratory where you can do stuff on a state basis as opposed to the federal, and then other states can kind of see what's working and what's not. Why do you think our friends to the West don't pick up on any of that?
When he was governor, Bill Clinton, I remember I got to know him back then, and his state had a lot of problems, but he said, well, thank God for Mississippi. And we're in a lot better shape than Arkansas was, but I'm happy to be next to Illinois. I got a lot of stories about Illinois. Can I tell one or two? So, one time I happened to be in Chicago on the day of the Olympics decision in 2007 or 8 or 9, somewhere in there. And, we were for Chicago. And everybody thought, we hit town, and man, there's a bandstand, balloons, everybody's got matching T-shirts, we're going to win. Been fine with us, but in the middle of the morning comes this stunning news. They not only didn't win, they didn't get out of the first round of balloting. So the balloons come down, and big downer. So my last event was a speech, a group at least this big, somewhere up there, and I do my spiel, whatever it was at the time, and Q&A session. There's a guy sitting at 2 o'clock. First question: what's your reaction to the Olympics decision? Like, why is he asking me? But you got to say something. I said, well, what's this world coming to when Chicago can't fix an election anymore? And like the crowd thought it was funny. When things go wrong, sometimes you just have to smile, don't you? The crowd thought it was funny. The media thought it was funny. The governor of Illinois did not think it was funny. He tattooed me on TV that night. I was at another thing up there one time, and it was about state economic policy. How do you get jobs to come to your state? And so I'm the wrap-up speaker, but before I got there, they had this panel, and one of the guys, some guy named Jimmy, basically gives an Indiana commercial. He says, we're thinking of moving over there. I mean, look, their taxes, their regulation, their litigation climate, their infrastructure, and just on, and their people talk like business people, you know, and not bureaucrats. He said, not only that, the next day, the governor of the state called me, and he talked like a businessman. So before he hung up, he gave me his personal email and cell number. He says, now that's how you do business. So this guy tells me this later. So he gets a question from the audience, and the guy says, my question's for Jimmy, but Jimmy, first I have to tell you something. Here in Illinois, when they give you the governor's cell number, it means something different. Great line. No, you ask a serious question.
I like your answer better.
I mean, you do ask, you say, good heavens, even if they didn't see the examples of other places, you know, why would they behave that way? Well, first of all, Illinois is completely dominated electorally by Chicago. That's why some of their counties, you know, said, could we come over could we sign up and come over to our state? So it's a one-party state, which is not a uniquely Illinois problem anymore. It's a very troublesome problem. And I'm troubled whether a team I favor is in charge or not. Competition in business or any realm is always a promoter of healthier outcomes. And it happens that we've drifted into a situation now through natural forces, clustering, social clustering. Been a lot of books written about this, where to an astonishing extent, you know, we only have only have 1 or 2 states left with a senator from both parties. We have 30 plus states that are so-called trifecta states: governor, Senate, House, one party. And there are that many or more where there are super majorities. I mean, we're one of these. So, you know, they can do what they want to do, and they have made some terrible decisions over there. They're an exception to the rule. Some people say, well, how come, you know, why didn't the federal government do what sensible states do? And the answer is they have a printing press. I used to tell people right when I first got elected, I said, first thing I did, I went in that nice big office, I looked in all the closets to see if there's a printing press in there, because that could solve some problems. But no, you know, you don't. You don't in business, you don't in your family, and you don't in any well-run polity. You know, our founders talked about writing a balanced budget requirement into the Constitution. Didn't do it because they thought it was unnecessary. I mean, it was just so clearly understood. You don't borrow way beyond your means. But, you know, you do pay a price. People are emigrating out of states that mismanage their affairs, tax too much, and make business too difficult. And so over time, it can correct. But, boy, they've put themselves in a real hole over there. And, you know, I feel sorry for some of their citizens, but not for the people in charge.
Right. Not our problem. So you touched on a little bit of this partisanship. If we look at that on a national level, I mean, you've sort of taken out the middle. You know, the old blue dog Democrats are gone, and the same on the right. And it's gotten nasty. How do you solve that problem? Not
No, it troubled me for 12, 15 years. You could sort of see it coming. I won't pretend I saw how far that trend would run.
Right.
I hope we will weary of it at some point. What we've learned, of course, is that it's not simply a political phenomenon. We've got other things at play here, specifically social media and all the related technologies, which feed people's confirmation bias. Hopefully you all are alert enough to know that algorithm that's sending you blogs and displaying news and so forth is pitching things that it thinks you'll respond to.
Right.
And it's now, you know, by the way, we're only learning, this all happens so fast. that the social science is just beginning to catch up to it, but it is catching up. And if you read into this, you'll see it's pretty clear that the more people's biases are confirmed, the more strident they're likely to become in expressing them. And especially when you can do this anonymously, or, you know, people, of course, say things on their phone, or, I mean, on their laptop that they wouldn't say to somebody face to face, all that. But no, I mean, it's, I hope for a way out. I hope that, you know, maybe like other trends, it can burn itself out. People will look for something new. There's, you know, Mark, you and I aren't the only two people very troubled by this. By the way, unfortunately, it works back into the issue I just talked about. When you get a state that is lopsided, the politicians pitch the fringe. Why? Because if you can get yourself nominated, you're elected.
Right.
And so it could be left or right, but the most strident voices tend to be disproportionately represented through that dynamic, as well as the other ones.
Right.
So I guess I'm not offering you a lot of hope that we're coming out of this anytime soon, but hope springs eternal.
Yeah. Couple of last things to touch on as we're getting towards the end here. What do you think are the biggest challenges for the state of Indiana over the next decade?
I don't think we have unique challenges, honestly. I mean, I wish we had more children. I wish our population is growing, which is good. But it's growing. You know, I'd like to see it grow more rapidly. We have been growing faster than any state from Iowa to Maine, which is, of course, many of them are shrinking. So that's not saying much. We all know that we'd be better off if we were collectively better educated than we are. If we had, and I don't think that's really people have fastened on college graduates and bachelor's degrees and above, and that's important. But I think we have been, at the same time I say that, been plain to me for a long time, we were encouraging too many young people to pursue that route as opposed to other forms of post-secondary education. So we got to get better at that. There's a new leader at Ivy Tech. I hope that they'll continue to find ways to improve. You've got a great one around here. You know, this model that you all created, Columbus is a model in so many ways, some time ago of IU, Ivy Tech, and related programs.
Purdue has a campus
co-located,
here,
yeah,
which
right.
is growing as well.
Yeah, you know, and the last thing is, I do think we've got, and some good work has been done on this. Another thing that motivated me to run from office in the first place was you could see, even in 2003, 4, 5, you could see the struggles of our smaller and mid-sized communities. And as I, you know, used to sarcastically say to people, I said, you know, I talked to the demographers up at Purdue, and they've assured me that all 7 million of us cannot live in fissures. You know, like, that's not going to work. What we really need is more Columbuses. I'm not saying that to be solicitous here. It's absolutely true. This has been a unique community for a long time. We need more Jaspers. Lafayette is another good example. We need to build around the strengths we have and let that lift the boats in the surrounding counties. And where we have, for instance, strong university like Purdue, if you make the effort, and we did, you can attract business to that,
right?
Which then brings opportunity to wider areas that have been slipping behind. We've got to solve that.
Yeah. Last one. What's one policy issue you strongly believe in that isn't getting enough attention today?
Yeah, the national debt that we're about to dump on. On people who deserve better. It has been a sad failure of our democracy. It'll be a black mark on the way that my generation, the generations I would say at least adjacent to it, are remembered. This is how, not the way the Washington Post and some of these people talk about democracy dying. This is how they die. They spend themselves broke. You know, my friend Neil Ferguson, who's probably our best current popular historian, has been writing about what he calls Ferguson's Law, and it's not him, it's a Scottish economist from 2-3 centuries ago. But refreshing his work, he looks back, he can't find, so I couldn't neither, an empire in history which spent, after it began spending more on debt service than on its national security, survived.
Which is where we are.
And we passed that point last year. And it's going to get much, much worse. So the fact that we never fashioned a vocabulary, have not yet fashioned a vocabulary to make an adult decision. You know, adults don't borrow huge amounts of money year after year after year after year. If you borrow money and invest it in the future, that's, at least up to a point, that's very smart. That's not what we've been doing. We've been borrowing and spending on ourselves today for government that we weren't prepared to pay for directly. So we're going to pass the bill on, to young people who didn't benefit from that. And we've not been able to explain that to ourselves in a way that every time somebody really suggests even taking the first few steps, somebody chops their head off. Makes a political ad where they're pushing grandma over the canyon rim or something. I didn't make that up. They did that.
That's real.
And so, the urgent business of the country domestically is to save the safety net. I mean, we've made promises to people and we need to keep them. But we can't keep them to everybody. We shouldn't, just to take the first baby step, we could quit sending a Social Security check to Warren Buffett, I asked him, he'd be okay without it. But there, a lot more than that's going to happen, or we're going to do a terrible injustice to people. I worry only secondarily about the economic consequences of a debt crash. Now suddenly people have waked up to the fact, the dollar is the world's reserve currency. Is not in anybody's constitution. That
Right, it can change.
Once the pound was, once the guilder was, once the Spanish, whatever was. We, I think, now have passed the point where I was going to give you a flip answer. There was another question that I thought you were going to ask, which is, okay, why should we be optimistic about the future of the country? Well, the first answer is, I always said that's the only operating philosophy that ever made sense to me. I used to have a coach a long time ago who, said, if you think you can or you can't, you're right. Yeah. So think you can. But but the other part of that answer is, I'm optimistic because we're going to have a crisis. I mean, a real one. And that's unfortunate, but I do believe this country has come, this country has come out with a completely different formula and a different view of the world, and come out after a lot of hardship better than before. And I just think that this generation the young generation of today are going to have that opportunity to reshape institutions, many of which are going to not survive the crisis that's coming. How's that for a happy note, Dave?
Well, I'm going to say, on that cheery note, we will wrap it up. Governor, we really appreciate you coming, spending some time with us, answering some questions, and let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mitch. I'm Matt Kirr, and I just had a couple comments for you before we let you go. I know everyone enjoyed that commentary almost as much as the aforementioned short lines at the BMV. We are all so grateful for that. I wanted to remind you all that Zach and I, we're the primary client service members of the firm. And I just want you all to know, we call you and we ask you this all the time, but we want you to know that we are at your service. We want to see you. We want to see you in person. If we don't do that, we want to see you on the phone, or, talk to you on the phone, but we are always at your service. We wouldn't be here without you. So thank you so much for giving us such great faith in taking care of your investments. Don't forget your box of chocolates, and it looks like we dodged the weather, which is great news. Everyone have a safe trip home. Thank you for coming.